welcome everyone. For those of you who are their first time at Shield Bearer, let me just let you know, I'll talk a little bit more about Shield Bearer after Paul, but we are a nonprofit that provides mental health services to people in need. Whether you can pay or you cannot afford it, we're still gonna see you. We have over 30 licensed counselors. We see from mild depression and anxiety all the way to people with suicide ideations, victims of human trafficking, first responders, military vets, you name it. Our youngest client has been, I believe, 3 years old, all the way to the elderly. So we missed because he went out. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Hello, I'm Pat Cardine. I'm the executive director of Shield Bearer.
Okay, and I'll talk a little bit about Shield Bearer later. Today, I want to thank my good friend Paul for being here. I think I met Paul, like a year ago, Paul? Something like that. And we began sitting together at this luncheon that we attend every month. And once he said a little bit about his life, and he didn't share the whole thing with me, right? Until probably 2 months ago, when he told me he wrote a book. The book is right now with the publishers, the printing. So I was like, why did you read a book? I mean, I'm glad you wrote a book, but about what? And he told me his story. So I was like, you need to come and talk to on one of our first Tuesdays, because I believe his message is really powerful. And these times, I think we all need to learn how to forgive whatever we're going through. So I'm just going to read a little bit about Paul. He was born in Hawaii. His parents were Salvation Army officers serving the migrant workers in the sugarcane and pineapple fields. Growing up, Paul attended 11 different schools in 7 different cities since his family moved frequently for his parents' work. Later, Paul graduated from the U.S. Naval Academy and then served 3 aircraft carrier tours in Vietnam, flying over 100 combat and combat support missions. He entered the Navy Reserves in 1975 and remained until his retirement in 1992 with the rank of captain. As a civilian, Paul worked in marketing and business development for major architect, engineering, and construction companies. His family's life was dramatically changed with the violent murder of his youngest daughter, Wendy, by her fiancé. He wrote a book to share the changes he went through from hatred and revenge to finally arriving at forgiveness. A journey made possible, he says, by the absolute help of his strong Christian faith and the love and care of a devoted family and many loyal friends. Today, Paul enjoys singing the church choir. I've never heard you singing.
La 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 la.
Helping young people in their Christian walk, playing league tennis, and taking daily walks with the family's 3 adopted dogs, 2 of which belong to Wendy. Welcome, Paul.
Thank you, everybody. I don't know.
If you don't, you can just push it.
Thank you, everybody, and thank you, Gabby, for arranging this. It took me a while to figure out what God's calling was through this tragedy, but it finally dawned on me a couple of years ago that I needed to share my experience and my walk. So I hope you'll feel similarly by the time this presentation is over. But before I get to that, I want to start with a little bit of my background. It's not advanced.
Maybe it's not on.
Oh, I think it's on.
I said. I think it's not working.
Yeah.
Point it back
Point
here.
it back.
Oh, there you go.
I thought that's backwards. Anyhow, as Gabby said, my parents were Salvation Army officers. And to prove to you, I know there's a lot of church leadership in this room, and I don't mean to insult churches, but the Salvation Army in its wisdom, my parents got married, My dad had gone to the Salvation Army Training College, but my mother had not. They wanted to be missionaries in Africa, but to punish them because she didn't go to the Salvation Army Training College, they sent them to Hawaii. Some punishment, huh? Here's, as Gabby said, my dad was a missionary there, and we served mostly the migrant workers who were harvesting the pineapple and sugar cane in the fields of Hawaii, mostly for Dole pineapple. Anyhow, the next slide shows him serving some of the military who came to protect the islands after Pearl Harbor. It's kind of interesting. If the slides would come back up, I could show you a picture of.
Sorry.
Well, anyhow, these were some of the Army people that came to protect the island, because Kauai, if you're not familiar with the island chain, it's the one that's closest to Japan. It's the westernmost island, and probably the prettiest in my opinion. Next slide. This is my dad. He used to do a Christian radio broadcast 2 or 3 times a week. And a couple of times my brother and I were asked to sing. I don't know how many people turned off their radios. I didn't get that statistics because they don't gather those kind of statistics back in 1946 or whatever. Next slide. This is my brother and I praying in 1946. My brother is 11 months older than I am. So they were doing something other than missionary work while I was over there. Next slide. This is more likely what our future was. As I said earlier, my brother, who's 11 months older, went to the Air Force Academy and flew combat missions in Vietnam. I went to the Naval Academy a couple of years after that and flew combat and combat support missions in Vietnam. Next slide. This was the Salvation Army Chapel, which I told you was taken over by the Army as their headquarters. In exchange for that, I gave my mom and dad a Woody station wagon and a trailer with a mess tent. And we'd go around the island to the different migrant camps and set up for revival services. It's a very moving period in my life on trying to get closer to Jesus Christ. Next slide. We moved to the Big Island of Hawaii. And these are some scenes from the Big Island. The scene on the left is a volcanic eruption from Mauna Loa, which happened, I can't remember, early 54, maybe a year before that. Anyhow, this was before they had all the restrictions they have now, where you can't even get close to a volcanic eruption. Maybe a half a mile away is about as much as you can get. My brother and I were standing out from here to the third row where Jean and John are watching the lava flow, and all of a sudden I smelled rubber burning. My mom says, "Get out of here. Your tennis shoes are melting." Next slide. I continued on. As Gabby said, I went through quite a few schools and get into my senior year in high school. And this is, we moved my junior year from New Orleans to El Dorado, Arkansas, which at that time I thought was a punishment. As God often does, he showed up and he showed off. I got my act together, became the senior, the student council president, and I think was very much instrumental in my getting an appointment to the Naval Academy. Next slide. And here's Stud Marshall in his Naval Academy uniform. Next slide. And there's my lovely wife at our ring dance at the Naval Academy in June 1964. And we got married in June. Actually, 2 days from now will be our 57th wedding.
Wow.
Next slide. And this is me as the flight deck officer on Coral Sea. As it says there on the slide, we assisted in mining Haiphong Harbor. In my honest opinion, I'm certainly no politician. If Johnson had done this 7 years earlier, we'd have lost 50,000 less lives in the Vietnam conflict. I think mining the harbor, which is a blockade, is considered an act of war. And I guess I can understand from some perspective is why Johnson made that decision not to mine Haiphong Harbor, but most of us in the military didn't agree with that decision. Next slide. That's the Coral Sea. That's where I was flight deck officer. Next slide. After work, as Gabby said, I went into the engineering construction business, working for a variety of different firms. Stone & Webster, Kaiser Engineers moved me here to build a heavy rail system. How many in their room have ridden the heavy rail in Houston? Never got built. So I ended up going to work for several other engineering companies. Primarily the one that really catapulted my career in that field was Brown and Root. I think it's a name that's pretty well known in this area. And I took over the government marketing program for Brown and Root. And most of the overpasses that you see between all the major freeways are designed by Brown and Root. That was a small, very small part in getting that work for Brown and Root. Next slide. I also did a lot of volunteer work. After getting off active duty in 75, I went to the reserves, as Gabby said, and retired several years later as a captain. And this was a replica of USS Houston, which is now downtown. If you go there, you will see it. And Bob Lanier assisted us in getting the lot and getting the permits to go ahead and set up that statue. Next slide. We also participated in a lot of plays in our we had mystery theaters in our subdivision, which is Lakewood Forest subdivision. And I think Gigi in this particular play was Emma Wright, and I was I'm a Wrong. I'm not sure that was my name, but it was something similar. Next slide. Life changed dramatically for us in October of 2013. This was my daughter's house and where the tragedy occurred. She called me up on a Monday of Halloween week in 2013 and said she had a surprise for me. Her boyfriend at that time, who we had not met very much, asked her to marry him. And we said, we don't know much about him. We need to get together to discuss your future. At that time, he didn't have a job. And we were very concerned about that. So we agreed that they'd come over on Friday. And they didn't show up on Friday. I thought they had eloped. On Saturday, I went over to the house to check and see what was going on. I found out I'd taken the wrong set of keys. So I came back on Sunday with one of her best friends and her fiance and went into the house and immediately knew something was wrong. She had pet adopted two dogs, one a Chihuahua and one a Jack Russell. And they had no food, they had no water. It was obvious that Wendy had not been there for a while. Her clothes were laid out for work. I soon discovered, after reporting this to the constables, that a woman her age, at that time I think she was in her 40s, didn't receive a lot of attention as a missing person from law enforcement. Any case, on Monday, the constables called me up and asked me to come up to their office and shared with me that they thought a homicide had been committed and they had to turn it over to the sheriff's department because they didn't have the resources to do all the forensic that was needed to perform what was needed to be done to try to figure out what happened. Next slide.
I'm going to close with the final conversation I had with my lovely daughter, Wendy. It was Monday, the 28th of October. And it was about 10:30 in the morning. She knows I play men's doubles every Monday morning, so she always waited, and she said, "Dad, I got a flat tire." And I said, kind of chastised her. It was second flat tire she's had in a couple of weeks. I said, driving through construction sites, or what the heck are you doing to get 2 flat tires? And I said, you want me to come over and change it? And she said, no, Colt is here. And I said, oh, is he going to change it? And she said, sure. And he said, I also have a surprise for you. He's asked me to marry him. And I said, have you accepted? And she said, yeah. I said, do you love him? She said, yes, sir, I do. I said, we don't know him very well, Wendy. You need to come and talk with your mom and about Colt. We'd like to know him more. But if you love him, I assure you we'll grow to love him too. And I think you ought to congratulate him on making such a smart choice to choose you as a loving bride. And then I said, I love you, Wendy. And she said, I love you too, Daddy. The last words, I love you too, Daddy. How great to have those. It's the last words that I have in my head. I love you, Wendy. Your mom loves you, Wendy. Your sister loves you, Wendy. Andrew loves you, Wendy. Your family and friends love you, Wendy. And Jesus loves you, Wendy. Good gracious, I don't have to tell you that. You're walking around getting us a praise. I know what you're doing. I don't think my mom's going to like that color scheme. We need to move some of this furniture around. So Wendy Gale Marshall, enjoy eternity. We'll be there with you soon.
This was the inurnment announcement. And there'll be a short, next slide shows a little bit about the inurnment.
This is your opportunity to come forward. If you have mementos that you would like to place in the niche.
Ready? All right, let's do it for Wendy. 1, 2, 3.
One of these balloons ended up in luck. This is what a funeral urn, cremation urn usually looks like. As a result of the destruction of my daughter's body, this is what we got.
Oh, wow. Oh.
Cremains usually are about 6 to 7 pounds for an adult. This is 14 ounces. That's what's left of my daughter. So the crematorium, which is at our church, I'm sorry, what do we call it? Columbarium. Thank you. She is in our columbarium at Linwood Presbyterian Church. And we took one of the jewelry cases she got. She loved to travel. Wendy was an adventuresome person. She brought back this beautiful jewelry case from Thailand. And we put her remains, what was left of them, in that jewelry box. And that's what's in the columbarium at Linwood. I get a chance to go see it every once in a while, but it's not something I enjoy doing. It's something I feel I have to do. Next slide. This is a scene, and I can, if we have time, I can explain how this all developed. from the Discovery Channel, and preceding the scene from the Discovery Channel is a dash cam of Colt headbutting an officer in Buffalo, Texas, where he had escaped. He was on the run for about 6 weeks after the murder, before we apprehended him in East Texas, not we, law enforcement. Anyhow, you'll see the headbutting, and the interesting thing about that, up to that point in time, and I know you're reading about bail bondsmen and the controversies that surround that whole industry right now. Originally, his bail was set at $60,000. After he headbutted this cop, it went up to $250,000. Which is kind of an interesting side note. Go ahead, next slide.
Then, nearly 6 weeks after Wendy is presumed murdered, a hotel maintenance worker in Buffalo arrives for what he expects to be a normal workday.
Adrian Vargas was going to the maintenance shed behind the hotel.
He noticed someone sleeping in the shed. He immediately recognized him as Colt Morgan.
After 2 weeks of searching for fugitive Colt Morgan, a Buffalo, Texas maintenance worker has just made an alarming discovery.
There were numerous flyers, numerous posters all in and around the Palestine, Buffalo, and Leon County area. The maintenance worker did a great job of immediately recognizing who the person was that was sleeping inside this shed, immediately went to notify police that Colt Morgan was there.
Where is he? Here. Officers in pursuit, officers in pursuit.
They saw him and they started chasing him.
Officers in pursuit, officers in pursuit.
I heard it over the radio, so that's when I headed up over there. Game on.
Come on, stop! Get on your knees!
Knowing person that killed somebody, I come out with my gun drawn, telling him, you better get on the ground.
On the ground! Don't make me kill you.
He looked like he was whooped. I mean, he was tired.
Colt Morgan, you have the right to remain
Since
silent.
Buffalo didn't have
Anything
a
you
jail,
say can be used against you in a court of law.
Very proud woman. You know, I mean, that's something that, hey,
The next day, Michael Ritchie
we got
and an
you.
assistant.
I think Wendy was a
from
very,
Harris
very
County
good
Sheriff's
friend.
Department
She was a
pick him
friend
up.
to everybody that
And on
wanted
the
to
way
be
back
friends
to
with
Houston,
her.
says, I'll give you
And
a
I
full
think she'll be
confession.
remembered
Starving
for her
to death, couldn't
kindness.
stop to get
I
something to
think
eat.
if I hadn't had a strong faith, it
Michael
would have been
Ritchie,
much, much
we
more
saw in that
difficult.
video. So
There's
the
a
guy was
peace
in
and
the
a little bit
outside
of
lane
joy
and
in
was
my
driving
heart
and
that
pulled in front of 3 or
I
4
know at some
cars
point in
and took the
time I'm
first
going to be
exit. The first
reunited with my
restaurant that they
daughter.
came to was a Wendy's. God showed up, God showed off again. Next slide. 2 years later, it's a fallacy to think justice is swift. And our court system does the best that it can. And it's no different in any other county in the country or any parish in Louisiana. It's just going to take a long time to get there. Plus the strategy, of course, is to slam Wendy and characterize her as a slut. And because of the age difference, cougar, and all those other terms that seem to apply in today's woke society. So after many discussions with the DA and them talking to Colt's attorney, we decided to have a plea bargain. Next slide. This is the courtroom. As I said, we had 5 or 6 appearances there. Every time Anthony Oso, who was the defense attorney for Colt, asked for a continuance to gather more information. And that's just the way our our law enforcement and our court system works. I guess the thinking is if they delay it long enough that certain evidence will be lost or people will forget the intimate details of what happened. In any case, he accepted a plea bargain for 40 years. Next slide. He's at the Texas Department of Criminal Justice Wing Unit for the next 40 years. They backdated his time served in Harris County Jail. And I'm sure he was relieved to get out of that awful place to go to TDCJ, which has much better facilities for prisoners. Next slide. This is my daughter at age 4, Wendy Gale Marshall. I wanted to name her Consuela, don't ask me why. And my wife told me to buy a boat. Next slide. This is my lovely wife and my lovely daughter at her cousin's wedding several years before this incident happened. Next slide. Choosing forgiveness because God and Jesus forgave us. Next slide. As it says here, it's a complex process. Everybody approaches it at their own pace. I approached it differently than my wife. I've approached it differently than my daughter. Sometimes I felt I was making great strides and not seeking revenge and questioning God as to why he allowed these kind of things to happen in people's lives. I thought I was a pretty good Christian. And so I will never learn the real reasoning behind that until I get to heaven. I just know it's foolish to question God. That's an argument and we're not going to win. And he has total disregard for my opinion, as he does for most of yours. Next vote. As I said, it's a combination of many tiny steps. Sometimes I thought I did well, questioning God, to accepting there is evil in the world, but God is still in control. Moving on to the realization that without forgiveness, the tragedy will continue to control you in some way forever. Next slide. We find forgiveness inside our hearts and minds. What happens to the people we forgive depends totally on them. It's my hope and my family's hope that something good will happen to Colt or TDCJ. Whether that's likely to happen or not, I don't know. I've seen some of the beautiful programs they have over there through the Heart of Texas Foundation, which is a theology-based curriculum that is offered to long-term prisoners. And after they graduate, they're encouraged to start their own little small churches within different prisons around the state of Texas. I think it's the only, well, there's a similar program in Angola over in Louisiana. Started by Grove Norwood, Heart of Texas Foundation. You might look it up and see what you can. Next slide. Waiting for somebody to repent before we forgive them is to surrender our future to the person who wronged us. Next slide. We do not excuse the person we forgive. We blame the person we forgive. Next. Forgiving is not forgetting. The scars will never be removed, but we learn to live with them. And finally, next. That's it. Anybody have any questions?
I don't have a question, I have a comment. When we say we can't question God, it's not necessarily we can't question God because we have to ask God for clarity. So we can question him on, God, why did this happen? What in my life did I need? Why did this happen? Because everything happens for growth in our life to get us closer to God. So I don't say we can't question God. It's just, what do we ask God? You can ask God anything because he tells us we have to ask for clarity, because if you don't ask questions, how can you get somewhere?
I don't disagree with you, Iris. I think I did ask some of those questions. And I guess I would have thought if I was going to get clarification, it would have come through the Holy Spirit speaking to me in some sort of capacity, and I'm not sure Maybe I wasn't listening hard enough. I don't know. I certainly do think that you can question God, and not in an accusing manner, but, why, yes, ma'am.
So as a pastor, I work with a lot of people who struggle with the anger and resentment and trying to let go and forgive. And I know that having a heart that's free is definitely a gift from God.
Yes.
But I think that there are things that we can do to help open ourselves to that grace. So what would you say are some practical things that you did to start peeling that onion of forgiveness?
I think the first thing is I leaned quite a bit on my family to help me, and I leaned quite a bit on Wynwood Presbyterian Church and the counseling that I got. I'll tell you the truth, I went to Grief Share, and it's a beautiful program, but our situation and our tragedy was so much different than any other kind of tragedy that a lot of people have gone through, long-term cancer illness, sudden death, loss of a child due to suicide. There's an organization in Houston which I highly recommend you check into called Parents of Murdered Children. They meet in First Presbyterian Church's basement on Main Street. It's now been taken over by Andy Kahn at Crime Stoppers. They meet at Crime Stoppers.
He was there when we were there. He's not part of it anymore because he's the head of Crime Stoppers.
Yeah.
And Andy Kahn was
Very helpful. What Parents of Murdered Children did was they educated us on the judicial system. And they said the only defense that Colt will have is to smear her daughter. To drag her through the mud and the muck, degrade her, call her everything imaginable, to try to show that there was some sort of justification in why Colt did what he did. And some of the details of the forensic report that came out after this, I did not share with my wife and my daughter. I didn't think they could handle it, because I think I have a pretty strong stomach, but I was appalled at the brutality of what happened. He basically stabbed her to death. And we think, who knows how many stabs it was. Picked her up, put her in the bathtub and let her bleed out. Took her to the fireplace and burned her body, feeding it in like a log. You didn't see the whole documentary of the Discovery Channel, but the sheriff up in Buffalo said, what kind of person does that? Took a little while to try to comprehend the violent nature of this tragedy and what would compel anybody that had any kind of conscience to do something of this nature. I don't know. Any other thoughts? Yes, ma'am.
I just had a question. I mean, first I want to say thank you for sharing your story, because it does impact a lot of people. And as being able to share that, because forgiveness is not something we're all capable of doing right away. But when did you realize, I mean, obviously through therapy, through counseling, you were able to get to that point. Did you have a specific sign, message from God that says, son, you have to forgive, you have to let go, and let me take over? Was there a specific moment for you?
I don't think there was a specific moment in time that I could point to. I think it was a combination of seeing how my parents had handled forgiveness. You know who the Salvation Army works with. They don't work with the high class of society. And seeing my dad kneel in the gutter on Bourbon Street praying with a drunk who just urinated all over himself and barfed in the. So I don't think it was one step. I think it was a combination. I knew to free myself, as I said in one of the bullets there, I had to somehow or another achieve forgiveness. I'm not sure there was any one moment that I could point to. I think it is a combination of tiny steps. And sometimes those steps go in reverse. You know. I'll go see her in the columbarium at Wynwood every once in a while, and I'll still get a little bit. I don't know if I'll ever overcome that, to tell you the truth. There's a hole in my heart. I don't think it'll ever be healed. So, whether that's good or bad, I have no idea. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
What you've been through is a great tragedy. And there's been another great tragedy recently.
Yes.
What words would you say to Colin's family? To help them begin their process.
I think the only thing I could say to them is try to turn it over to God. I think there were a lot of good people that gave me a lot of advice. And didn't resonate with me. You know, there are very few people that could put themselves in our shoes. I think one of the best things that happened to me to take off in my mind is I know my daughter had a will, we couldn't find it. Because of her relationship with Colt, she had gotten herself into debt. And I ended up spending probably 3 months trying to get through that hurdle. And if they were willing to work with me, I was willing to pay off some of what was owed by her. If they weren't willing to work, I said, take me to court. So that somewhat took my mind off the tragedy itself. I thought I could clear up my daughter's name, if you will, by taking care of her debts. At the same time, like I suggested earlier, I've been getting a lot of good counseling from my family and friends. Where I was doing a eulogy of my daughter was at Wynwood Presbyterian Church, and I don't know, Jean Ann, you may have a better idea. I think there were over 600 or 700 people. I don't know what the capacity were.
It's about 400 capacity in church.
The most I've ever seen it, ever. Anyhow, the choir usually comes down after they sing all their songs, and there was no place for them to sit. So I think that kind of support. My wife, who had to leave for another appointment, was in real estate for a while, and between her real estate friends, our Christian friends, the organizations that I belong to, my Naval Academy friends and classmates, and people that I had served in the Navy. All of them showed up to give the Marshals support. And I can't tell you how wonderful that felt. To know that there were that many people praying for you. And to know that eventually God would bless you somehow or another, help you figure out how you were supposed to deal with the situation. And I think he has. I felt called to do this about 6 or 7 months ago. Jean Ann, who I introduced you to earlier, is helping me publish the book. And she has held me accountable for getting deadlines. What the heck did you mean by saying this? And I'm not sure I understand it. So readers aren't going to understand it. We hope in a month, Jean Ann, it'll be published. So. Others have any questions?
Yeah, I'll go back.
Yes, Pastor.
I can't begin to express my gratitude for your courage. One of the things that's really clear to me as you were talking, how much your love for Wendy is still alive in your heart.
Yes.
And I'm curious, I can only imagine that this kind of tragedy brings with it so many different layers of frustration. I was wondering how you reconnect with the purity of the love that you do with your daughter through this process.
That's good. Hadn't given much thought to that. I think all of you, I think most of you in this audience probably have children. My oldest daughter, Michelle, is like her mother. Wendy was very much like me. She challenged me most of the time. If I drew a line and said you couldn't cross it, Michelle, my oldest daughter, would stand 3 feet away from it. Wendy would get up there and she'd go. When I wasn't looking. So there was, I think I love both of my daughters equally well. I just kind of love them differently because of their personalities and what they've meant to me in my life. She had some wonderful experiences. I'll share one with you. The rule in our family was if your mother spent time preparing this meal from her menu, you got to at least try it. Wendy didn't like zucchini. We grew zucchini. This was Lebanon, California. So she and I would have this mental battle. I wouldn't let her get up until she had at least eaten a few pieces of zucchini. Sometimes those battles lasted 45 minutes to an hour. Many times she fell asleep at the table. The zucchini still on her plate. Well, this one time, I looked up and all the zucchini was gone. Yeah, that's right. 2 years later, we get transferred to Houston, Texas, and the movers come in, and they try to separate my table, and they can't do it. Petrified zucchini in the trash. So, I didn't win many of those battles. Anyone else? I would like to challenge everybody in the room. If you have a similar situation in your life where you sustained a tragedy, to seek it in your heart to offer forgiveness to whoever it was that caused that tragedy. And to those that are in a position within their church or other organizations, I do feel God has called me to share this message. So if you find an opportunity where I can share that message, you can either get a hold of me or Gab. We'll see how we can fit it in. Yes.
Well, forgiveness, this is something big to me because I had to learn to forgive a lot of people in my life because of going through things, and especially with my mom. I think all girls should be able to have that real genuinely bond with their mother, and I didn't get that. I don't have that with my mom because I had to be the bigger person and learn that I had to forgive her, even though she won't, acknowledge what she caused in my life. But one of the main things is my child's father, he stabbed me in my chest while I was pregnant, and my mom set me up. She told me he wasn't there, and so when I got there, he came from out the back, and she was like, well, you shouldn't have made him mad. So to learn to forgive my mom, and then, like, my mom really caused a lot of tragedy in my life, but I still loved her from a I still love her today, but our bond, people say thou shalt honor their father and their mother, but they leave out the next scripture where it says parents don't provoke your children. So you can't have one without the other. So you can't say I'm going to hell because I don't respect her in a certain level of how people think I should respect her. I don't see how a mother will allow a man that raped her child and try to smother her to death and was running down the street with blood on my gown. And my dad said my dad died of cancer, but right before he died, this was literally like 5 months before he passed away. He said God told him he needed to go home because something was wrong, which my uncle had broken the house and raped me and was trying to kill me. But my mom, as soon as we took my dad off of life support, my mom allowed him to move in the house the same day. So forgiveness, there's something that you have to work at every day. It's not just one day at a time. You have to pray consistently throughout the day because as soon as your mind go idle, the devil will send those thoughts right back in. Oh, I got to get revenge, or or evil thoughts, you're never gonna get anywhere with the evil. You gotta understand, always find the positive in the negative, because but the word tells us, everything works out for the good of those that love the Lord. So everything happens for a reason, and we may not understand why, but it's a mission for us.
Any other questions for Paul?
I do have cards up here if anybody wants to get a hold of them. They're not business cards. My wife tells me they're vacation cards.
If we get one of those, we're allowed to go on vacation. Well, thank you, Paul, for sharing your story. As everyone here said, forgiveness takes work. And I'm pretty sure we all have a level of. He's pointing something. Somebody what? Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, Bruce.
I just want to thank Paul. As a father of two daughters myself, who are both entirely different as yours were, I thank you for having the courage and the strength to come and talk to us today. I know. Means a lot. And I appreciate where you're coming from. I am blessed with my two girls are on somebody else's payroll. They're doing what they want to do. They're a strong, independent woman. And I'm so proud of them. And I'm so blessed to have them. I just want to say thank you for sharing. I appreciate your loss. I mourn for your loss.
Thank you, sir.
And thank you.
Well, thank you, Paul, and he's gonna stay here for a while if someone wants to talk to him, ask him some questions, or just, again, as I said, we all go through things in our lives. Not everyone is the same, and not everyone deals with tragedy, problems, family, in the same way. So I think we all have homework to do. Practice forgiveness in any stage of your life you are. If you have a grudge with a friend, family member, or you have to forgive someone that took away your child.